Okay, we're a little bit late, but I think we're going to get going. I don't have the introductions yet, but there's a couple announcements to be made, and hopefully the introduction's going to be here before we start. Okay, I'll go and start making some introductions while they get the text up. We only have really 45 minutes to an hour to set this whole shindig up, and it's sometimes stressful to get everything, including the streaming. I'm actually streaming from my iPhone.
There you go, perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. Just go up higher. You start with green and yellow then red.
So welcome everybody. This is debate number 7. Dave and I got together about 8-9 months ago and said, hey, why don't we put together some type of debate where we can have some discourse between each other's views. And to be honest, I think this is just a great idea to make sure that to expand our viewpoints, so to speak. A lot of atheists come here and they do get a little insight, more insight than from the Christian side of how people believe, more like, unlike, oh boy, I got so much on my mind now, and I'm not a professional speaker. We do have some professional speakers on the team. There we go. All right. So it's a great time to think about your views. I know that some Christians out there think that they're 100% sure of their beliefs. And ask any atheist or skeptic, and you'll find that none of them have 100% belief in nearly anything, including gravity. It's always changing, depending on what it is. So I have an email list here. How many people are new here to this particular debate? Okay. Oh, great. Okay. Well, I got a couple. Remember, this is streamed live, so instead of me telling you to silence your cell phones, I want you to get out your cell phones and text all your friends and relatives and say, watch this debate tonight. This is probably going to be the most watched debate of all of our debates. Afterward, we're going to be going over to Thank Goodness It's Fridays. Okay, some of you got that. Afterward, at 9:30, we'll need some help breaking down, so any volunteers are welcome. The restrooms are across the way and to the left slightly, and one of them might be open, so it's late enough to kind of squeeze in either one, so I took advantage of that a few minutes ago. Our future debates are going to be very interesting, probably, hopefully as well seen as this one. This, of course, is on evolution. We're going to have the history of Jesus. We're going to have free will. We're going to have lots of exciting debate topics, and probably in about 200 years we'll run out of topics. So I think I got everything. Just as I want to take the temperature of the room, how many people here are Christians? Raise your hands, please. And how many people here are atheists or agnostic? Okay, well, about 50-50. And the viewing audience, raise your hand. No, just kidding. I can't see anyone. Yeah, we might have a comic relief a little bit later. By the way, all the atheists and agnostics, we do have a conference coming up on May 3rd. I think if you're part of the Background Skeptics, you probably already know about that. And a big announcement, we're having our first Orange County Sunday Assembly, which is a church-like service. I really don't like to say those words, but it's very similar to a church service in the fact that there's a sense of community among non-believers, and everyone is welcome. It's actually open to everyone, including believers. So the format about this debate, I think that everybody that's been here before knows a little bit about it. Each side has 40 total minutes of opening and closing between each side. So they can have a 20-minute closing between two of them, a 20-minute opening between two of them, that equals 40 minutes. In between the opening and the closing is Q&A. So it's about half or more than half of Q&A, and this is what this debate is designed to be. It's designed to have a little discourse, not just between the debaters, but between everyone here and all the audience as well. I think that I emailed about 1,000 people about the text. I haven't received any text yet, but if you want to text your friends about my phone number, I don't know if you're quick enough on the draw for that one, but some people at home, get your pencils out. You ready? Okay, here goes. 714-394-6153. That's our cell here. Text your question to which side, or both sides if you like, and I'll try to squeeze it in, okay? So that's the format. So get ready for your questions. I'm sure each side is going to have, each side meaning of the audience is going to have questions for the debaters tonight. Okay. I'll go with the Christians first. John, Baumgardner has an MS in electrical engineering from Princeton University and a PhD in geophysics and space physics from UCLA. His PhD research included the development of 3D finite element models of the Earth's interior, known as Terra, specifically to investigate the physics aspect of the Genesis flood. He is generally credited with providing the primary original research undergirding the concepts of catastrophic, thank you, and I'm not, I need my glasses, that's what I need. Catastrophic plate tectonics in connection with Noah's flood. Between 1997 and 2005, he served on radioisotopes and the age of the Earth, RATE, team, R-A-T-E acronym, team that documented multiple independent lines of radioisotope evidence, thank you, that the Earth is thousands of years, not billions of years old. Between 2005 and 10, he was part of a small team that developed Mendel's Accountant, a computer model for exploring key topics, population genetics, related to origin and history of life. Okay, 3 more. John, wave your hand. Oh, not yet, I got 3 more to go. Still in the instruction phase here. You'll have plenty of time to talk, I guarantee it, okay, John? Okay, Dave, is Dave here yet? Okay, he's away doing some very important errand, I assume. Dave Lehman has a BME from University of Minnesota, a B Divinity from Masters of Divinity from Grace Seminary, and a Doctor of Philosophy from Oxford Graduate School, and a PhD from LBU. Wow, a lot of letters there, John. He lectures on universities, campuses, churches, and conferences on creation, cults, and Christian evidences. And this man is a very busy man. Next comes Gary Hurd. This is Gary. Gary Hurd received a doctorate in social science from the University of California, Irvine in 1976. He subsequently served on the faculties of California College of Medicine and the Medical College of Georgia. Since '85, he has returned to archaeology, the principal focus of his early research. He has received honors for teaching and research and has over 100 publications, including abstracts and technical reports ranging from the topics of psychiatry, mathematics, and chemistry, to insect and fish digestion, prehistoric ceremonialism, and forensic taphonomy, the decay of animal remains. He is co-author of Why Intelligent Design Fails, a scientific critique of the new creationism, 2004. And sorry, Gary, I did not get your other introduction.
Oh, well.
Okay. Robert Richert is a good friend of mine. We meet nearly every week with a small group in Long Beach for lunch. During his childhood days, Robert Richert was interested in both science and art. In elementary school, he became obsessed with dinosaurs, studying about them and creating drawings and paintings. He spent many hours outdoors observing, studying, and collecting living things. One of his favorite toys was a microscope. Robert's enthusiasm for science, especially biology, has never waned. Robert majored in scientific illustration and biomedical art at California State University, Long Beach, earning his BA. In addition to art, he took courses in ornithology. You're going to have to explain what that one is. Thank you. See? That's what I love about groups like this. It's just like, I learn something every day. Ornithology. Okay, now I know what it is. Botany and autonomy. Anatomy. It's an autonomously anatomy. Anatomy. After college, I told you this is going to be a common approach to this, right? After college, Robert spent many years volunteering as an interpretive naturalist. He has led hundreds of adults and children on informative walks at local nature preserves. That's it for me. Now, I will be moderating as well. So when you bring up your questions, make sure it's on topic. If you don't have a question but a statement, please make it less than a minute, and just say, please respond to the statement. You can. No preaching, no sermonizing, no Satan worshiping, anything of the sort at the podium, at the microphone, please. We're going to have plenty of time for questions, and please keep it on topic, and please be very simple. And now I think that we're going to start, and I don't know, these guys decided which one's going to go first. Who is going to go first? Okay, let's welcome John Baumgardner.
Well, it's a treat for me to be here tonight. Looks like we're going to have a lot of fun. Hope to really be able to engage on some of these issues. What I'm planning to talk about tonight, I'm going to begin with what Darwin's assessment was of the fossil record, and just his conclusions concerning how well the fossil record supported his ideas. And then I'm going to ask what has changed since Darwin's day, and then zero in on one of the major issues that Darwin had trouble with, and just how we're to understand it. So what I'm talking about is relatively simple. I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to have to move rather quickly. Darwin acknowledged two major difficulties that the fossil record posed for his theory. And this is a quote from chapter 10. He devoted a whole chapter to this issue of the geological record, the fossil record. And I'll just read this. But just in proportion as this process of extermination or extinction has acted on an enormous scale, so must the number of intermediate varieties which had formerly existed on the earth be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation in every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. So he acknowledges that the fossils are not there, and that somehow he proceeds to have a whole chapter trying to understand why they're not there. But the point is that they're not there. He goes on a few pages later, but I do not pretend that I should ever have suspected how poor was the record in even the best preserved geologic sections, had not the absence of innumerable transitional links between the species which lived at the commencement and close of each formation pressed so hard or hardly on my theory. So Darwin himself conceded this theory implies not just a few transitional types, but innumerable ones, an inconceivably great number, close to infinitely numerous links he admits that simply do not exist in the rock record. So this is the first major problem that the fossil record posed for his theory. He goes on, he says there's another and allied difficulty which is much more serious. I allude to the manner in which species belonging to several of the main divisions of the animal kingdom suddenly appear in the lowest known fossiliferous rocks. He goes on to the question why we do not find rich fossiliferous deposits belonging to these assumed earliest periods prior to the Cambrian system. I can give no satisfactory answer. So then he goes on, nevertheless, the difficulty of assigning any good reason for the absence of vast piles of strata rich in fossils beneath the Cambrian system is very great. The case at present remains inexplicable and may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views here entertained. So he's very candid in acknowledging that these two problems, and especially the second problem, the sudden appearance of a wide diversity of animals in the lowest, most fossiliferous layers, he realized was a major difficulty. So where do things stand today? Has further paleontological exploration relieved these challenges for Darwinian theory? In a word, the answer is no. And back in the 70s, there was an interesting development, the emergence of what's called the concept of punctuated equilibrium. In the 70s, a century after Darwin, a few daring paleontologists In particular, Niles Eldredge, Stephen Gould, and Stephen Stanley ventured to argue that it was Darwin's gradualism which was in error, rather than the fossil records being so profoundly incomplete. The story seems to have begun for Eldredge in a laundromat in Michigan in 1968. He had been collecting trilobites in the Midwest for his PhD research, but his specimens from many successive strata showed no evidence for gradual change as classical Darwinism had taught him to expect. In the laundromat, he had an epiphany when he realized that the absence of change is indeed scientifically significant. Or as he put it later, stasis is data. This realization eventually led Eldredge, Gould, and Stanley to offer in the 1970s a new theory for the history of life known as punctuated equilibrium. In this new theory, rapid innovation in small isolated populations produced new types that left few fossil intermediates. These new types tended to persist until some extinction event wiped them out. In 1977, Gould wrote that the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. In the same article, he says Darwin was so wedded to gradualism that he wagered his entire theory on a denial of this literal record, this fossil record. Darwin's argument still persists as the favorite escape of most paleontologists from the embarrassment of a record that seems to show so little of evolution. A clear implication of the emergence of the idea of punctuated equilibrium is that the inconceivably great number of intermediates and transitional links which Darwin acknowledges, still today, these links are still nowhere to be found in the rock record today. And I'm gonna skip this, but I'll just briefly mention it. Not only are transitional forms generally missing, they are also selectively missing, as pointed out by the world's preeminent paleontologist of Darwin's day, Louis Agassiz of Harvard. And he pointed out that the crucial links seem to be selectively missing. And here is a diagram from Rumer's vertebrate paleontology text showing the history of vertebrate animals, the various vertebrate types, and where the links ought to be are represented by the dashed lines. There simply aren't any noteworthy transitions linking these various types together. But the main point I want to make is that the finely graduated types that Darwin pointed out are systematically not there. And Darwin said that he expected at any time in the history of life that there would be as much variation at any one time as there is today. That many fine gradations among species. And if so, there ought to be vast numbers of intermediates. And he admitted those are simply not there, and the punctuated equilibrium simply affirms that indeed is still true. What about the greater difficulty for Darwin, namely the manner where all these main divisions, representatives of the main divisions of the animal kingdom suddenly appear in the lowest fossiliferous rocks? What is the current status of this difficulty? In a few words, it has become even more severe. So the abrupt appearance of diverse types of life in the lower Cambrian rocks is even more dramatic than Darwin ever imagined. 23 of the 27 animal phyla found in the entire fossil record are present by the end of the Cambrian. So it truly was an explosion. The graph here on the left, we have 20 phyla appearing in the Cambrian. 3 phyla appearing in the latest Precambrian. A couple of those are uncertain. They may actually just be in the Cambrian. So 27 phyla in the Cambrian explosion. Only 4 phyla appear later in the record, and there are 9 phyla that we have today that are where they found no fossils for them. So it was truly an explosion. According to Darwin's theory, diversity should increase with time. We should have more and more phyla as time goes by, as life diversifies. But the record says just the opposite. The diversification was there at the very beginning.
You don't have to pan.
This is a chart showing the same thing. This one actually lists the phyla. These two phyla that include jellyfish and mollusks. Paleontologists don't agree that there really are fossils from these phyla in the latest Precambrian. There are sponges. So here you add the three phyla here, the 20 here, to get a total of 23 at the end of the Cambrian. And later, in the later geological periods, there are only 4. So, and there have been some spectacular fossil discoveries made since Darwin's day. In the early 1900s, there was the Burgess Shale in British Columbia. And paleontologists were just
I can't hear you. You have to talk.
blown away by the strange types of animals that appeared. This one, a very common one in the Burgess Shale, is the morella. This is a drawing. This is the actual fossil. Here's another one that was called hallucigenia. And paleontologists weren't sure which was the head and which was the tail of this animal. Then another one here, Opobinia, a predator here, like nothing else would ever been seen in the fossil record or living today. Strange, very strange animals. Another one, Amalalocaris. This thing was a ferocious predator, up to 3 feet in length. This is the fossil. And then in the 1990s, there was a spectacular Cambrian explosion find in South China, near the town of Xinjiang. And more strange animals found, more phyla added. And in that fossil deposit in South China, they even found vertebrates, fish. So vertebrates now are part of the Cambrian explosion. And so just sort of repeating the history of life's diversity according to the fossil evidence looks like this, with essentially all the phyla appearing suddenly at the very beginning, all the diverse body plans. And whereas Darwin's theory, he believed a single early ancestor that has since resulted in a lot of diversification so that the maximum diversity should be at the top, not the bottom. And I show this just to remind you of the astonishing complexity of these Cambrian animals. This is a trilobite. This is a specialized eye of a certain species of trilobite. Apparently the trilobite buried itself in the sediment, only the eye sticking up. But the kind of nervous system that would be involved in supporting that sort of eye and all the other systems indicates this is a very complex animals. You have animals like this appearing out of nowhere in the rock record. No candidates for ancestors for any of these animals. So what about the rock record below the Cambrian? What has been found since Darwin's day? Do we find the rich fossiliferous deposits? Well, the answer is no. However, a few mostly bizarre forms have been documented in the topmost part of the Precambrian record, in what's called the Ediacaran. And these are 3 types of organisms that have been found in Ediacaran deposits in several places around the world. But paleontologists still debate whether some of these are actually, whether they're plants or animals. And so there's not enough data to put them in a phylum as yet. Okay, but the evidence is that the conditions were favorable for preserving fossils if there had been any significant life there. Also in this Chinese deposit below the Cambrian, in this Ediacaran section, they documented sponge embryos just beginning to divide. This one is at the 8-cell stage of division. And these are very delicate and have been just incredibly preserved well enough to look at them under an electron microscope and see the expected structure in these sponge embryos. So it appears that there was nothing, as far as the sediments are concerned, they were entirely suitable for preserving life. Okay, so we have the sponges, and there are some hints that there may be some jellyfish and mollusk fossils in this Ediacaran layer. Okay. Yes. What?
Is that a time issue?
I'm probably past my time. but
Remember,
I'm
you
gonna
can take as much time as you want.
I'm going to take the
because
next.
it comes off to 40
I'm
minutes,
almost
right?
finished.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So what is the explanation for why we don't find these fossil deposits below the Cambrian? Well, I would suggest that a good answer seems to be that such deposits do not exist because the animals Darwin theory expects simply never existed. So that's certainly a possibility. What then might explain the sudden appearance of so many diverse types of organisms at this point of the record? You still would like an explanation for why all these animals, these diverse types of animals suddenly appear. We suggest that it was the abrupt onset of a global scale cataclysm that suddenly wiped out shallow marine environments all over the earth, and in certain places preserved these animals in a very high state of good state of preservation. And there's evidence for such a global cataclysm. It's the striking global stratigraphic and paleontological discontinuity known as the Great Unconformity. And this discontinuity in the rock record is evident in the Grand Canyon. It occurs at the base of the Tapete Sandstone. And if you stand on the south rim of the Grand Canyon and you learn what this Tapete Sandstone looks like, you can trace it from one horizon of the canyon to another. So this was involved in unimaginable violence on a global scale. This is a photograph taken at that boundary in the Grand Canyon, right here. This is the Tapete Sandstone. But notice the size of the rock clasts here. Many of them are a foot or more, 2 feet or so in dimension. And if you can imagine a water process able to erode and transport this course of material and spread it out over, basically over the whole North American continent. In another place in the Grand Canyon, there is one boulder in this Tapete's layer that's 15 feet in diameter and weighs 200 tons. So we're talking about some heavy-duty catastrophism. And this map shows the distribution of the Tapete Sandstone and its equivalents in North America. So it covered much of North America. This part right here is called a Precambrian shield. It has been thoroughly scoured of sediment. So it's not. So the reason it's not shown there is that whatever sediment may have been there in the past is no longer around. Now, last August, I happened to be in Wisconsin and visited this site of the Great Unconformity in central Wisconsin. So this is that same boundary, and it's incredible. It's the same type of rock, quartzite, purple quartzite that you see in the Grand Canyon. This is the uneroded quartzite, and these are big quartzite boulders immediately above that boundary. So that's just an example of this, the extent and the reality of that major discontinuity. And it's at this very boundary where the great unconformity occurs, immediately above this boundary. That's where the great unconformity is located. It occurs where the few places where Ediacaran sediments exist, it lies just below the Ediacaran sediments. And elsewhere where the Ediacaran sediments don't exist, this unconformity is just below the Cambrian sediments where they exist. So the destruction of shallow marine habitat by the cataclysm responsible for the great unconformity appears to be an obvious explanation for the abrupt appearance of the Ediacaran and lower Cambrian life forms in the sedimentary rock record. It seems logical that that's the explanation. And I might point out that as far as a global discontinuity in the rock record, this one here, this great unconformity, lies below what's called the first megasequence, first described by Sloss, Larry Sloss in the 1960s. And these megasequences are thick sequences separated by erosional unconformities that are essentially span the whole continent of North America. This is the margin of the continent. This is the center of the continent. The dark green represents sediment. The yellow or light green is an absence of sediment. And so there were 6 of these erosional unconformities that bound these packages of sediment, indicating that there was catastrophism throughout the record that produced the sediments that are now on the continents, as you see here. So I don't have a time to talk much more, but this basically displays is a cross-section of the sediment record in the western United States, a north-south cross-section running through western Arizona and western Utah. And spanning, this is the great unconformity right here. This is approximately a mile thickness of sediment exposed in the Grand Canyon, and you have several times that much more sediment as you go north up into Utah. And I just briefly claim that the vast lateral extent of these layers, the internal evidences of high-energy water transport that exist in many of these layers, the lack of erosional channeling between these layers, all point to a catastrophic origin for the entire fossil-bearing record. And as a final point, I want to suggest that the fossil record seems to have been formed quite recently. And just one evidence for that, it does represent fossil data. The finding in 2005 by Mary Schweitzer of flexible blood vessels containing red blood cells from a T-Rex skeleton from the Hell Canyon Formation in Montana, dated at 68 million years. There's still this well-preserved soft tissue in that dinosaur. And since then, there have been several other accounts of soft tissue, just excellent soft tissue preservation in a wide assortment of different animals. So I'll say that putting all this together suggests a much different picture of Earth history, a much different interpretation of the fossil record. And I say that especially the fossils we find in the lower Cambrian rocks are crying out for explanation. Any serious model for Earth history needs to be able to account for them. Thank you.
Okay, before we continue, I have an announcement for the people watching on the stream as they change over. Dave, are you going to do yours now? I thought you were going to do the closing.
No, I'm thought maybe we were
Yes.
gonna switch back and forth.
It's up to you guys. If you're going to be doing your opening now,
We may not have much time.
I don't think you'll have, that was over the 20 minutes, so I thought, what would you like to do,
We
Dave?
were gonna take a total of 30 right now. So if
And we're
he's.
gonna go 30 and then 10.
and then
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So how much time is gonna lie? He has 5.5 minutes.
He only has 5.5 minutes?
Okay, well,
He talks.
That's the way it crumbles there, Dave.
Let fossils crumble.
We'll let you go a few minutes over, but these guys can go over too. It's a kind of formal, do you have the PowerPoint working? Oh, Dave, that's your microphone there, the other microphone there. Everything's set up. It's okay, it's a comedy of errors here.
Dave, that did not include the closing time.
Right.
5.5.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Before you go, Dave, two quick announcements. If anybody has an iPhone 5 USB adapter on them, I know half of you do, no, just kidding. Please let me know. I'm streaming from my iPhone and it's going fast. And on the web as well, there was a mistake in the playlist, so if you want to watch the beginning of the first 10 minutes, just wait until I get it going on the afterward. It'll probably be up tomorrow and you can watch the beginning as well as the whole thing again. Okay, Dave.
Jared, go ahead and widen up a little bit, please.
Okay.
You got it? All right. What a guy. We got our iPhone connector, yeah.
There's usually a switch on the computer that says display F function or something.
I'm doing that.
Okay. Timer, please erase this time from the technical time does not count.
You got it
Can you
on,
put it on a stick?
you got it on stick?
Because John's working.
Well, let's see if I can get
We'll work on this.
It's usually this one right here. Duplicate? Sure, see that it's here. Okay. Maybe now we should have said something before we hit this one. So, go back here.
Oh, I don't know what I'm researching for. Test has to do with that, but
I was like,
So while he's waiting, I want to tell a story to everybody. Is this working? Check,
long
check.
time ago.
It's off.
Once upon a time.
okay. Good friend of mine just completely redid his front lawn, and he spent a lot of time on overlooking that before. And then he had once he was done, his best friend happened to be a minister, and he was an atheist. And the minister came over, and the first thing he said to him was, "Joe, you and God have made such a wonderful garden." And my friend looks at the minister and says, "You should have seen it when God was on his own." That's for everybody. Okay, we're ready to go.
I got a better one than that.
Hey, Phil. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There we go.
One of them works.
Voila. I suppose I
Probably use this. All right, fossil evidence is a measure, really, as John was saying, of transformation, not of transformation, but of destruction, death, burial by water, as contained sediments. Well, up to about 1800, the interpretation of geology was that, and this is what taught all the Ivy League schools, Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, was that basically it was on flood geology. What we see was an evidence of a worldwide flood. Now, these fossil remains, what a fossil is, might be shells, teeth, bones, entire skeletons, somebody's purse. A fossil may be a footprint, a bird track, a trail mark, passing lizard, raindrops, a lot of things, but a lot of times they're no longer the original material either. It's just simply deposits that have been filtrated, been replaced by minerals. So, but fossils, there's two things that you have to look for when you're looking at trying to understand what happened in the past. First of all, as Dr. Carl Dunbar said, fossils provide the only evidence that evolution has occurred on this planet. And as Dr. Ernest Meyer from Harvard said, mutations provide the only mechanism that would cause evolution to occur at all. So mutation shows that whether it could occur at all, fossils show any evidence that it actually has occurred. So as we look at the fossil record themselves, what do we see? Well, as John well pointed out, you see an explosion right there at the Cambrian where we have vertebrates. We have squid, octopus. It's the same squid and octopus you see today. So what you're seeing is that it's called stasis. It hasn't changed any. It's the same as it was back then. And abrupt appearance. I mean, what did it evolve from? There's nothing there to evolve from. It just appeared. That's what we'd expect in a creation model. So, the only substantial evidence that evolution has taken place in the past, if there is such evidence, is to be found in the fossils, of course. And so, here's Ernest Meyer. Ultimately, all variation is due to mutation. Theodosius Dajovsky also says the same thing. The process of mutation is the only source of raw materials and hence of evolution. And as I have said before, Dr. Baumgardner was one of the fellows that helped develop this, the Mendel's accountant, and I had just downloaded it on my computer. Now this was been about 5 years ago. I went into the International Creation Conference. I was there, and I asked Jerry Bergman, who has 4 doctorates, 5 master's degrees, and this is his field, and I asked him, has anybody ever seen a positive mutation? Well, here's, he said, wait till the rest of them get here. So I said, well, okay. We got 200 scientists from all over the world crammed into this room, and I said, Jerry, has anybody ever seen a positive mutation? He said, no. Nobody's ever documented a single positive mutation. And there's a reason for that, because what is a mutation? A mutation is simply like shooting a bullet at a chromosome. It's simply, it's just jumbling up or destroying some of the information that's there, and as specificity increases, the role played by spontaneity decreases. The more complex the system is, the less likely a random process is going to increase that complexity. It's kind of like driving my car into a bridge above and expecting it to turn into a Mercedes-Benz. It's not likely to happen, but that's exactly what we're talking about. Mutations are a random process, but there are about 20 other things that you have to look for in a mutation. First of all, they're extremely rare in nature, extremely rare. But not only do you need one mutation, you need to get 1 billion positive mutations according to permeate the population barrier to get some kind of a nascent organ, a new organ of some kind, and that organ has to reach entropy. In other words, it has to be fully functional or it's not going to work, it's not going to help the animal survive. Then you have to locate it in the right part of the body. That's not likely to happen. And then you have to connect it to all the other organs. Now this is all through a random process. And so that's one of the problems that you have. And I just mention that because that's the probability of it ever happening at all. Now when we look at the evidence from the fossil record, we can see probably why we don't see it, because it's not something that you would expect to happen. These are just some of the things that you would have to look for in a mutation. And of course, the fact of finding a truly beneficial mutation. Now they have some where they say the mutation is beneficial simply because it keeps it from dying, but it's not as viable as the other one. In other words, it doesn't produce the protein that would kill it in some bacteria. So in true beneficial mutation, you don't see that. They're just dangerous accidents. They're intertwined catastrophes, and what happens is the intertwined nature of the catastrophe is that if it affects one part in a positive way, even if it could, it will probably affect all the other organs in a negative way. And every character is affected by all genes. That's one of the things that Ernest Meyer said. Again, you have to breach entropy, which means it has to be fully functional in order to help the animal survive. And we've never seen a nascent organ, a visible one. And then there's visible and invisible mutations. Most invisible mutations will kill the organism. In other words, before they even become visible, you probably destroyed it, and they always affect the offspring first. So it's unlikely that you're going to get any offspring from it. Now, if I can figure out how to do this. Now, assuming all mutations were beneficial, in order for evolution to begin to occur, even in a small way, it would have to necessarily not just one, but a series of closely related and interlocking mutations, all occurring at the same time in the same organism. And if it kills the organism, then you got to start all over again. Well, as I had mentioned before in other topics, Colin Patterson, head of the British Museum. Now, this is the largest collection of fossils in the world. And he wrote a book called Evolution. And in the book, Dr. Luther Sutherland read the book and he said, I noticed you didn't include any transitional forms in your book on fossils. He said, I would have loved to include some transitional forms if I'd had one. And his quote is, if I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. You suggest that an artist should be used to visualize such a transformation, but where would he get his information? In other words, I couldn't even tell an artist how to draw one because I don't know what one would look like. And then the whole concept of a transitional form doesn't work anyway because it's not able to swim or fly or do anything adequately because it's in transition. So not only does it have to survive, but it has to be the only one to survive, yet it's the least capable of surviving because it's not quite adapted to any particular environment yet. So Stephen Gould of Harvard, American Museum, what happened is all the leading paleontologists, we're talking about Stephen Gould, Niles Eldridge, Stephen Stanley. Now these are the leaders in the field. These are the guys that would recognize a transitional form if they could ever find one because that's what they're trained to do. And all these guys have jumped from the uniformitarian model where they're looking for gradualism to this punctuated model. Basically what the punctuated model was, it says this mother reptile in good faith laid a reptile egg out this bird. Well, that was what happened with I'm going to move rather rapidly here. Austin Clark. Now, Austin Clark, he was an ardent evolutionist, was on the staff of the Smithsonian Institute from 1908 to 1950, a member of several important scientific organizations, a prominent scientist, authored over 600 scientific articles and several books, finally came up with the book Zoogenesis, The New Evolution, and in it he said, if you're going to believe in evolution, it's going to have to start from the ground up, dirt and water, plants and animals. In other words, it's hard to get one animal to change into another animal. Why? Because the organs are all there. So you're going to have to somehow, what are you going to do with the organ that's there? You're going to have to somehow transmutational change is going to be impossible according to him. Well, at that same year, Richard Goldschmidt had been working 25 years with fruit flies, trying to get them to mutate into something besides a fruit fly. And he got deformed fruit flies. He could actually split a gene. He could get 4 wings or 6 wings, but he could never get anything but a fruit fly, not a house fly or a horse fly or a alligator or anything else. So he gave up, and that was after 25 years, spent his whole life trying to get a fruit fly to somehow mutate into something else. Now, if you can't do it in a laboratory, it's most likely not going to happen in nature because mutations are so rare. So anyway, then we have Stephen Gould, and he comes up with what he calls punctuated equilibrium, which says about every 50,000 years, maybe a million or so mutations occur in one organism, and all of a sudden you jump from one kind to another. Well, if you get more than 2 mutations, it's almost likely going to kill the organism. You need millions in order to get this thing to work, to jump from one kind to another. So it seems to me what they're saying is the reason you don't see evolution in the present structure of things is because evolution goes too slow. You don't see it in the fossil record because evolution goes too fast. Anyway, we don't see evolution in the present or the past, and science is supposed to be what we can see and observe. So this is basically what he's saying. You need every 50,000 years 2 creatures, male and female, who are living near each other, thus producing a new species or a new pair. This is why of all the scientists, paleontologists, and geneticists are most likely to publicly repudiate evolutionary theory in disgust. They've spent their lives fruitlessly working hands-on with 1 or 2 main factors at the very center of evolution, the essence, fossils, or the mechanism by which it occurs, mutations, and the part of the body within which it must occur, DNA. Everything hinges on fossils. Clearly, all that the evolutionists have to prove their theory is fossil evidence of life forms living in the past. If evolution, the cause of life on Earth, then there ought to be thousands, variously millions of fossils, because if evolution, if uniformitarian is true, everything ought to be in transition. It ought to be hard to find something that's not in transition. So far, we haven't been able to find anything that they would consider to be a transitional form. These are the guys who would recognize it. That's why the paleontologists have jumped ship, more than 50% of them. So, I will shut down. Thanks.
Okay, Don, maybe you can mention how many minutes they have left so they can plan their closing. And we're going to have Gary or Robert. Who's going to be going first here?
I will.
Gary will be coming up. Do you have a PowerPoint, Gary?
Yeah, we do. One question. You mentioned someone you chatted with said there was
Jerry
no-
Bergman.
Huh?
Dr. Jerry Bergman.
Oh, Jerry Bergman. Oh, okay. I thought that.
Stay
Oh, no
away
wonder.
until he starts talking.
I know of him.
I might take this moment to mention to the internet watchers, the streaming viewers, that if you'd like to text in your question, because a lot of people didn't get that at the beginning, get a pen handy real quick, 714-394-6153, and please make it on topic to the discussion.
I got, yeah, here we go. Let's go with Baumgardner. They named it after you. Blank, there we go. And then we go to, there we go. So blank, 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 blank. Now it's because.
Get a mic, Gary.
Right now.
Get a microphone.
Oh, okay, here we
That one, green one, green one, green one.
go.
You
Okay.
can stand at the podium if you like.
This is hot.
Okay,
This is a hot mic.
that's a hot mic.
And I'll try not to speak too loudly. Before I started this, I got interested in creationism as a director of a small museum. And it was a lovely place, but it's so small that it basically folded. And I would get creationists who would come to the museum. And they would see the artifacts, they would see the fossils, and they would see the rocks and so on, and they would quite often get angry and say, well, this is all Satan's lies, and this is all fake, and so on. My docents would invite them to speak with me if I was around. And so as it turns out, I would offer to open up the cases for them, so they could hold them. And that was not going to happen. They were convinced that something was being pulled on them. We all wonder at some point about origins. And there was a little kid who goes to his dad and says, Daddy, where do we come from? And Dad doesn't want to do the baby talk, and he's like, He goes, well, monkeys, we came from monkeys. It's called evolution. The kid goes, cool, and it's like, yeah, he's blasting off. But, he thinks, we better get a second opinion here. Better, the real expert's Mom, right? So he goes to Mom and says, Mom, where did we come from? And she doesn't want to do the baby talk either. She says, well, God made Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that's where we came from. Well, that kid's confused. He says, well, Dad says we're monkeys. She goes, well, that's his side of the family. So, that's a real blank. This is not about atheism versus religion. For one thing, because science is about testing facts about the material universe. So that gives all religions a free ride. This is not about that at all. It's not about evolution versus Christianity. For one thing, there are hundreds of millions of Christians who accept evolutionary theory and geology and the ancient origin of the earth without any challenge or threat to their faith. There are thousands of American clergy. As of today, 12,958 professional clergy in all major denominations in the United States, Christians, who have affirmed with the, I keep pushing the wrong thing instead of the Clergy Letter Project, which states very, very directly that evolution and religion, particularly and specifically biblical religions are not conflicted by evolutionary theory. Nor is creationism particularly Christian. Certainly not uniquely. Haram, I always call him Yah. I can't pronounce it, he's Turkish. His real name is Adnan Akbar, which is actually easier for me to pronounce. He's a civil engineer, which is a kind of an irony. Henry Morris, the kind of creationist in the United States, was a civil engineer as well. Well, he's a pretty radical Muslim. He wants to destroy Israel. America is the evil Satan. And all he has to do is prove that evolution is false, and therefore Islam is true. These folks are kind of interesting. They're Hindu creationists. And of course, evolution is all wrong. Geology is all wrong. The fossils are all nonsense. It's all just a big lie to try and, put down Hinduism. And all I have to do is prove that it's not true, and Hinduism is true. And then there's this fellow here is really something. He's a neo-pagan, and all he has to do is prove that evolution is a lie, and it was invented by white people to try and force Native Americans to become Christians by destroying their native faith. Okay? These guys all sound alike, except for whose religion wins. It's always their religion that wins, and it really shouldn't be an issue at all. This is not a fossil, but it does show us something really significant about how we read the fossil record. Most people, without thinking about it, will think, oh, well, okay, we got lines here, and one line per year, and so there's stacks of rocks, and we just count the stacks of rocks, and we figure out how old stuff is. That's not how we do it. Okay? And in fact, you couldn't even count all of these and find out how old something was, because you don't have the heartwood. I mean, you don't go anywhere with this one. But it still has a neat story to tell. Down here, early on, you got nice, healthy growth bands, right? You can all see them, huh? And all of a sudden you get up here, and they're not so good anymore. They're all scrunched up, and it's not growing very good. Now, what would happen to a ponderosa pine that happens to be growing in Arizona that all of a sudden stops growing so good? Well, we're right in the middle of it, here, okay? What's it called? Drought? Okay? And what comes along with drought? Fire, okay? And in fact, each one of these is a fire cut, okay? Boom, boom, boom. And then there's even one on the very outside. Altogether, that tree survived at least 9 forest fires. Okay? And it recovered, and it's growing, and it's healing, and then it gets hit again. Okay? There's even some good times in here, some nice rains back. But we've got another problem, this cloudy stuff. That's all from beetles attacking the tree. Okay? But it survived those. One of the ways it did it was by putting out all this brown stuff. Any of you guys have done any carpentry or ever, had Christmas trees, all that sticky stuff, right? That's pine pitch, and the tree has gone into a huge production just to kill these beetles. And it worked. Okay? Happy times are here again, and we're growing good. Okay? But the Arizona Highway Department needed to widen the road, and that was the end of that tree. It got through all those fires, and it turns out a buzzsaw got it. We look at the rocks, we look at the fossils in the rocks, and we interpret them in the same way we just looked at that tree. Okay? And when we do this, we come up with a sequence of events, a sequence that has a story. Okay? It's not just stacks of rocks. Okay? It's a number of events. And up until very recently, we didn't have any of those little numbers up here that are millions of years. We didn't have those little numbers there because it wasn't really until the 1980s that you could trust the numbers to be particularly accurate. You would print them. You say, well, I did such and such a test, and I got this and such result, And if you were a professional, you just went, yeah, right. Okay? it wasn't really until the early 1980s that techniques of dating became sufficiently rigorous and tested that you could give them a whole lot of credibility. You could get sequences out of it, right? But in terms of some calendar date, you didn't have it. Okay? Now we can. And in fact, one of the things we find out in that geological record, each of the new eras, okay, that were actually penned down in the 1800s, just by looking at the fossils and the rocks. Each one of them is marked not by a rapid expansion of species. Okay? This is something that Gould and his colleagues got totally wrong back in the 1970s when they were in graduate school. Gosh, boy, that whole, man, Rex evolution. Look at those graduate students. I mean, they got tenure, and they were kind of bomb throwers. I made a lot of big claims when I was a graduate student too. I didn't get in print the way they did. But what we have here is a series of extinction events. Some of them, like the Permian Triassic, that was 90% of the species on the planet became extinct. Now, if we're going to talk about Noah's flood for a second, where are we going to put all of them? Okay? Did they die in the flood? They couldn't get on the ark? Huh? I mean, how many guys were going to get on the ark? Okay? We're not talking about just a few tens of thousands of the big dinosaurs. We're talking about many, many more thousands of the little ones, right? And many, many more thousands and millions of species before them. We can also associate many of these events, many of these extinction events, after the kind of, it's like erasing the blackboard. Once you got a clear blackboard, you can write whatever you want. The survivors don't have any competition. They're free to get as weird as they want, right? Get goofy, right? The extinction of the dinosaurs, right here, KT boundary. We have a global Iridian anomaly, we have microtectites, we've got a 90-mile diameter crater. I've been on that crater. We didn't know it was a crater. We didn't know it was a crater, we just thought it was some weird hills. Okay? I mean, yeah, it's a crater. It's a big, big crater. It's huge. I didn't even recognize it. You have to see it from space to really appreciate it. And then there's a little kicker right here, the Deccan Traps. It's not a crater, but we'll get back to it.
Gary, could you back up just about 2 feet so we can get That's good. That's good.
Okay. All right. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can study this material. Okay. We can go all high-techy. This is one of my colleagues, one of my professors as an undergraduate. He supervised my first research fellowship in geochemistry. He still looks like that, damn it. I mean, I don't know what it was, but I passed him, I lapped him, right? I'm much older than he is now. But this is a nuclear reactor at UC Irvine, and it's where I did my first undergraduate research in geochemistry. And this is what it looks like when it's gone critical. That is the light, the only way you can see this light on the world is looking down into a pool of a hot reactor. It's shrink-off radiation, it's matter and antimatter annihilating itself. And it's just so pretty. That's the only reason I put it in here. It doesn't mean anything, it's just pretty. I also did the field work. In fact, I liked the field work a lot more than the lab work, which is why I ended up doing what I did. This is a young and skinny me on an ancient beach line. We also, would be up a lot of banks, a lot of trench cuts, mapping little bitty sand layers, little bitty rock piles that changed from coarse to fine as we went through the seasons, the years, the millennia. Now this one, I've sketched in some channels. These are stream channels that we found in the side of that cut. And in fact, right down about here, we have radiocarbon dating that says that's about 5,000 years old. And right about where he is at this channel, that's my colleague Doug, And that's about 3,000 years ago. And then you get up to the top, daylight, obviously that was, maybe 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. 25 years ago. I'm sure it's only no more than that, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh dear. Well, we had to move fast. I should have moved faster. So we had to keep ahead of this stuff. But we did get carbon dating. Okay? And when we mapped those carbon dates out for the last 8,200 years, they're in exactly the correct order. We have one trench here, second trench there, everybody's lined up. And you know what? If you had a flood that's going to take off most of the continent, we would have seen it. Okay? And that's for the whole county. Each one of those little squares is a village, a Native American village. And you'll notice there's no gaps, except for one right there. Okay? That wasn't the flood, that was a drought. And in fact, that was a global drought. And it happened about 1200 BC. It was also at the end of the Bronze Age, the start of the Iron Age, and it was the collapse of the Egyptian Empire. Big event. And here it is right here in Orange County. We got a little markup. Okay? That's interesting too, another biblical thing. That marks a drought that happened in the 1st century AD. Lake bars, ice cores, coral rims, they're annual. These are all the way that we interpret the fossil record, creating a chronology that includes all of these events. And it's all coherent, and it's all found everywhere in the world. Turns out this is from oil company drilling data. The oil companies don't care how you find the oil. They just want you to find it. Ouija board, tarot cards, Bible. What they do is drill. And when they drill, they found the entire geological column, top to bottom, in order, and complete. 37 different locations. They spend billions on this, and they don't do it for fun. They do it because it works. Okay? Now this is the context for Robert's material. He's going to talk about the more classic fossil approach. I wanted you to see the scaffold that we put those fossils on. Okay? Sorry if I went a little too far over. How bad was I? What's the time?
16 minutes. So I got 30.
Oh, shame.
One of us messed up.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, we gotta switch the PowerPoints over again?
Yeah.
Let's see how fast it takes to do this. Okay, thanks for the iPhone charger. I got the one that's working, so that's a good thing. Is everybody formulating their questions? How many people here will be asking questions? Okay, that's good. We only got a couple questions on the text, so I'm going to say the number one more time. I know there's people watching, 714, especially from Jim's class. Jim, are you here still? Haven't walked away yet? Okay, good. Jim is a teacher, local college. 714-394-6153 for all the viewers. I'll put it up on the screen one more time after this. So now, Robert, are you ready?
Certainly.
Sword.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. Evolution, interesting topic. Ever since Darwin's day, fossils have been discovered, and in the last 30 years in particular, there has been an explosion of fossil discoveries linking various plants and animals in their evolutionary relationships. Abundant examples exist. I only have time to show you a few. But since a picture is worth 1,000 words, rather than talk about it, I'm going to show them to you. Here are 3 very quick examples of evolution that are very well documented with hundreds, if not thousands, of fossil specimens. the evolution of ancient fish. Where's my arrow? It's gone. Where's my arrow?
Oh, the one, you have a laser
Well,
point,
yeah.
this little, red
Oh,
line.
that's, okay, sorry about that. That's the wrong one. Now, at the top, going, this is way, way back, hundreds of millions of years ago, ancient fish, and particularly low-fin fish, gradually, mind you, evolved into amphibians. This guy here is called tip-top lake, recently discovered. Is it a fish? Is it an amphibian? It has characteristics of both. It's a classic transitional fossil. The fossil evidence for the evolution of almost all the dinosaurs you know about is very well documented. There's just one. At the bottom is the famous Triceratops. You all know that. And a succession of horned, frilled dinosaurs related to Triceratops, which evolved from these guys here. Whoa, how'd that happen? Which in turn evolved from these guys at the top here. Just one example of many. Walrus evolved from a seal-like ancestor that lived about 20 million years ago at the top. These are the actual skulls, except the one. And you can see the skull gradually getting smaller and those canine teeth become huge. Now I know Dr. Hurd has firsthand knowledge of these fossils as he's actually dug them up. On the left is one of the ancestors, land-dwelling ancestors of seals and walruses. Well, here's what creationists say and have said today. There are no transitional forms between species in the fossil record. Most fossil specimens are fragmentary, you can't make heads and tails of them, and there are too many gaps in the fossil record to conclude that evolution or that species changed in times. All of these are demonstrably false. Well, what's a transitional fossil? Nobody's defined it yet. According to the Paleontological Journal, a transitional fossil exhibits a mosaic of features from organisms that lived before and after. This is Ambulocetus, transitional fossil between land-dwelling animals and modern whales. Most of the pieces on this puzzle are missing, but who can tell me who that is? Charles Darwin. How could you possibly know that? Most of the pieces are missing. This is what creationists say about fossils. Well, there are a few key elements about this picture that tell you who it is. There are many ways that scientists can figure out things about fossils with incomplete specimens. And if I have time later, I'll go into that in detail. This one is very interesting, and I'm going to do something I hate to do in a speech. I'm going to read microfossils. The images you see here are called microfossils, the skeletons produced by tiny animals, most the size of a pinhead or smaller. Some species live only a few weeks, while other species live many years. History records a continuous reign of generation upon generation of these plankton skeletons to the sea bottom. Most of the open ocean floor, shallower than 3,000 feet, is covered by trillions of microfossil skeletons. In fact, millions of fossil individuals can be found in a single cubic meter of ocean sediment. Scientists use piston core drilling deep into the ocean floor to extract long tubes containing microfossils. Hundreds of examples of uninterrupted evolution spanning millions of years have been extracted. It is known with precision, with no gaps in the fossil record, when hundreds of species arose, evolved, and became extinct. In fact, continuous generation of microfossils also reveal uninterrupted macroevolution, not just the evolution of new species, but the evolution of new genera as well. And up here you can see some examples. This one here spans 5 million years. These are just 5 examples, the guy at the bottom evolving into the guy at the top, of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of intermediates with no interruption. And we have lots of these. There is no way that the sheer number of these fossil generations in uninterrupted succession deep into the ocean floor could have been produced in a few thousand years. The math just doesn't work. Unless the lifespan and rate of reproduction of extinct species is measured in seconds or nanoseconds rather than in weeks or years. Let me put it this way. If the Earth is only 6,000 years old, these guys have to be the horniest creatures that ever lived on the face of the Earth. And many, as was mentioned, micropaleontologists work for the oil industry. They use these things to find oil, folks. Here's the Cambrian explosion, which was mentioned earlier. The actual Cambrian period, 545 to 490 million years ago. The explosion, mind you, lasted from 523 to 510 million years ago. 18 million years of explosion, right? The fossils we see in Cambrian rocks look like these guys, and a few of them look like familiar animals today, but what you don't see is what's important. There are no, contrary to what was said earlier, no fish, no amphibians, no reptiles, no birds, no humans have ever been found in Cambrian rocks, despite creationist claims. But what about what came before? Right before the Cambrian, the Vendian period, 650, excuse me, I'm speaking, lasted from 650 to 545 million years ago. And these are the Ediacara, these are the fossils. Some of them were 2 feet long. They were the first large things to live on Earth. Before that time, things were really tiny. There are 2,000 specimens of these things gathered from many, many places on Earth, and there are 60 species. So much for the Cambrian being the moment of creation. These things lived before the Cambrian. And here's evolution occurring in the Vendian through the Cambrian. You can see the Ediacara, a little dot down here. Whoops. Dot down here at the bottom. That's the Ediacara. Then later in the Vendian, you get these what are called little shelly creatures. They're very small, about an inch long or smaller, but they're not as sophisticated as the guys at the top. And then you get this spate of evolution up here, which was more like a slow fuse than an explosion, to be honest with you. Now, one thing about these fossils in the Cambrian explosion, this part here, many of them had shells, and shells fossilized well. And so what looks like an explosion of light may be a misrepresentation of what's really going on, in that there's so many of them have shells that they fossilized, where a lot of other living creatures before didn't have shells and didn't fossilize. Dinosaurs of a feather flock together. Let's talk about bird evolution, something I know about. Steuromymus means squirrel mimic. This is one of the oldest known fossils of feathered dinosaur. Now, if you look, you can see, hopefully you can see, it's hard. It has feathers all along here and all the way along its back, and it has a large, thick area of feathers here, which is why it gets its name from the squirrel. These are very primitive feathers. They're just hollow rods. And when we look at embryos of birds developing, their feathers first look like that, and then they later become specialized. So looking at embryology, you can learn a lot about how things evolve. This is a theropod dinosaur. Theropods are the T-Rex type dinosaurs, and almost all of them, it turns out, had feathers. Archaeopteryx, very famous, probably the most famous fossil in the world. Creationists say Archaeopteryx is just a bird. But this is absurd, because Archaeopteryx shares dozens of features with reptiles not found in any living bird today. Look at the skull on the left. It's bony, it's thick, and it has teeth, whereas birds today have very light skulls, and they don't have any teeth. Compare these skeletons at the top there. At the top is a raptor-type dinosaur, and then Archaeopteryx, and then a modern pigeon. Look at that. Now, which one does Archaeopteryx look the most like? No living bird today has a long, bony tail. They have long tails with the feathers. And Archaeopteryx does not have the large breastbones that modern birds have. And modern birds also have what's called a pidgestyle, with few bones in the tail are fused together. So this thing, Archaeopteryx, is a classic transition between birds and dinosaurs. Here's another one, Dave, Sinomythosaurus. Had short little stubby wing feathers on its arms. There's no way this guy could fly. So what's he doing with feathers? Well, feathers probably evolved for sexual display and other things. And then through a process called exaptation, eventually some species evolve feathers for flight. Here's some more examples of feathered dinosaurs. These have been discovered in China in the last 20 years, and there are abundant. There are numerous examples of these. Let's go to the whales. I love whales. They're wonderful animals. The evolution of whales, or from bossy to blowhole, an utterly incredible tale. This is my sarcasm based on Dwayne Gish reading Creationist, who died last year. In his slide presentation, he had a cartoon showing a cow evolving into a whale, claiming that it's absurd to believe that cows evolved into whales. Well, no paleontologist ever said cows evolved into whales. Whales did evolve from ungulates, and particularly artiodactyl split-toed ungulates about 50 million years ago. Now, there are some unique features found only in whales and their ancestors and no other mammals. That's how we can separate them into groups. The serrated triangular shaped teeth are found only in partially aquatic and marine dwelling fossil whale ancestors and no other group of mammals. Look at these things. The shape and density of the bones in the inner ear region are unique to those in the skulls of land and aquatic whale ancestors, plus modern whales, and in no other group of mammals. The double pulley-shaped structure on the Australopithecus ankle bone is found only in modern and ancient artiodactyls and fossil whale ancestors, and no other group of mammals. Artiodactyls today are sheep, goats, and pigs, and antelope. And so you have here in the middle modern pronghorn antelope Australopithecus, and on either side, a fossil whales. No other mammals have that structure. Here's one of the earliest of whale ancestors, Indohyus, almost complete skeleton. We know this was partially aquatic. They can look at oxygen isotopes in the bones to determine whether they were living on or near water a lot or fully aquatic. It's complicated, but anyway, this is one of the earliest ancestors, and it does not have the teeth that I showed you earlier, but it does have the Australopithecus, and it also has the inner skull region with the bones of the inner ear that are unique only to whales and their ancestors. That's how we know. In 1979, paleontologist Philip Gingrich picked up in the blue sections just partial remains of the skull of a creature, and you couldn't figure out what the heck this guy was. But there's two things about this that are diagnostic. Creationists always poke fun at this and say, well, how can you make sense out of these incomplete fossils? Well, there's two things about this that tell us that this is an ancestor of whales and could be nothing else. It's the inner section of the skull, which you can't see here, and the teeth. And subsequent to his discovery, there have been many more fossils of this creature called Pachycetus found. Here's a reconstruction of Pachycetus and an artist rendering. It was about the size of a wolf, lived between 52 and 48 million years ago. It had dense bones, indicating that it was partially aquatic, and the wear pattern on its teeth indicated that it ate fish. Pachycetus at the top compared to Ambulocetus. You can see they're very similar, but Ambulocetus is more streamlined, its limbs are shorter, and its hands and feet are bigger for swimming in water. This is Dr. Thewissen with the actual fossils of Ambulocetus. As you can see, it's nearly complete, and an artist rendering. Dr. Thewissen was kind enough to respond to my email and give me a lot of the information I'm using here. He's one of the leading authorities in the world on the evolution of whales. There are some qualities about this I'd like to share with you really quickly. This thing was found in an estuary-type environment. Its fossils were found in what was once an estuary. And saltwater and freshwater animals have different ratios of oxygen isotopes in their bones and their teeth. And this can be measured in fossil whale bones. And the level of such indicates whether they lived in freshwater, brackish water, or saltwater. Well, this guy lived in brackish water. Here is a more advanced fossil later on, Rhodocetus. You can see where that nostril has moved, the nasal openings moved up from the tip of the nose, slightly more toward the top. And it was more aquatic than its predecessors, and it lived in salt water. We're getting more whale-like here. Basilosaurus lived 40 to 34 million years ago. It was 60 feet length. This was a big animal. 7 genera exist of these creatures, not just 7 different species, but 7 genera. It's primitive, but it's a fully aquatic saltwater marine whale. And you can see those tiny little legs in the back are almost vestigial, and they disappear in modern whales. This thing is well on its way to becoming a whale, and the nasal opening has moved further up on the top of the head. Squalodon, and even more recent, we're looking more like a dolphin here, and the nasal opening is almost at the top of the head. It's about 10 feet in length. The upper teeth are more like a modern dolphin, and they're peg-like, but the lower teeth are more like their primitive ancestors. They have that triangular serrated shape. So, in summary, this is whale evolution. There are many, many more species that are listed on this chart, and clearly, the evidence is overwhelming and obvious that whales evolved from a land-dwelling ancestor through a series of steps that you can clearly see, from a land-dwelling animal to one that's partially aquatic to ones that are fully aquatic. Bruce, how'd that get in there? That was my last date on eHarmony. Human evolution is very well documented, spanning from about 6.5 million years ago to the present. Anthropologists get into heated debates about the arrangement of these fossils, particularly some of these close together here, and creationists seize on this as if to say that this whole field is in disarray, but that's not true. They agree that over time, from 6.5 million years ago to the present, we see an increase in the size of the cranium, a flattening of the face, a decrease in the size of brow ridges, a decrease in the size of the canine teeth, upper mandible becomes less square, more parabolic, and the foramen magnum, the hole at the bottom of the skull, moves more toward the bottom. Here are some examples: the chimpanzee skull on the left, human skull on the right. You can clearly see a progression in the flattening of the face and the increase of the size of the brain, and the numbers are listed below there. Evolution in action. Lucy, the most famous human hominid fossil, lived about 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago. Nearly complete. I saw this fossil when it was on display here at the Bowers Museum a year ago. But what's important, we now have fossils, not 300 fossils, fossils from over 300 individuals of this species alone. Well documented. Interesting thing about Lucy, on the left you have a chimp, and on the right you have a human. Look at the skull of the chimp and the skull of Lucy. Pretty close, right? But look at the pelvis. Chimps are not bipedal. That means the primary mode of locomotion is not walking upright. They've just not built for it. They're 20 times less efficient than we are at it. And the skeleton, the lower part of the skeleton, the pelvis and the legs, over time adapted our ancestors more to upright walking. And you can clearly see that Lucy's pelvis and legs are much closer to human than they are to ape. Yet her skull is much closer to ape than human. That's what we call a transitional fossil. Homo habilis, more advanced form, 600 centimeter brain. It's got a flatter face, smaller brow ridges. This thing is clearly transitional between humans and apes. Homo erectus, a more advanced form. The skeleton is practically human-like, practically, not quite. But look at that skull. The size of the cranium is much smaller and it has large brow ridges. Another example of another transitional fossil. And here are some artists, I'm an artist, I'm biased, recreations, based on fossils, by the way. There's a lot of careful work that goes into this. The variations in our hominid ancestry. So in summary, the fossils absolutely roar evolution. They don't just say it, they scream it. And most paleontologists, in fact almost all of them, agree. I don't know where you got the figure that 50% of paleontologists don't agree with that. That's just not true. It's more like 99.9%. But don't take my word for it. You know, I did a little search and I tried to find organizations that support evolution and are teaching it in our schools. And I put together a short little list. Can you read that in the back? Of course not, because there are 76 scientific organizations listed here. I didn't even know there were that many, including the American Geophysical Union, that support evolution and teaching it in our public schools. Now let's look at how many scientific organizations support creationism. Hello? 0. And Dwayne Gish said it all. Creation is, of course, unproven and unprovable by the methods of experimental science. Neither can it qualify as a scientific theory. Creationism is religion pretending to be science. It is not part of mainstream science, never has been, and never will be.
Thank you, Dave. Richard, Robert. Whoa, all over the place there. Okay, so usually we go into Q&A at this time, but I think that we should just have a couple questions between the two. So guys, make sure to speak into the microphones, and we'll just have 5 or 6 minutes of discussion between the two, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay? Dave, you're my nemesis here, so go ahead and start. Use the mic, please.
And what am I supposed to do?
Do you have any questions for the other side? Just a little discourse, because you don't have a real rebuttal, you see, except for the Q&A. So now is the time to rebut.
Is this time?
Is this timed?
Or are we going to be timing this?
No, this is informal. So actually, you guys, if you want the question and answer periods right now, you can go.
I have a rebuttal, but I don't know that I would have a question. But
Okay. Can you make it less than a minute? And they'll respond?
Well, I couldn't make it less than a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, this is the time for discussion. Okay, let's go and open it up for questions then, and line it up. Oh boy! We got some hot ones here. Okay, make sure to make your questions to the point, please. And let's see here. I have to switch one microphone around. Stand by. Okay, Damien, go ahead.
All right, I wanted to address DNA. You talked about no mutation. They now realize that there's actually 2 things particularly recent that's happened in DNA. One is fossil DNA, which is found in about 100 forms of the genes. It's called fossil genes or immortal genes, and it shows from 3 million years of starting and a continual thing that's spread throughout all vertebrates. But the other thing I wanted to say was also the regulatory genes that actually turn on and turn off other genes from working. Thanks.
You got a question there?
Would you address that?
Well, we have ancient DNA. We can actually determine that. We can get that from bones, various other things, and that's how we can tell actually when it was changed. I mean, when that particular recombinant DNA, Y chromosome, when that entered the system. In other words, that particular recombinant DNA, we can actually tell that that person was a particular strain of human. In other words, whether he was Mongoloid or Australoid, whatever he was, we can determine that.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fossil or immortal genes. The actual genes that transfer in the DNA. They're, in other words, the genes like that make eyes or make color or make a limb, that you see the genes constantly growing from 3 million years, that they now know that there's immortal genes, about a couple hundred that are found throughout and the spread. You know what I'm talking about?
I think
Sean Carroll talks about it.
I think.
Microphone, Gary. Please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here. Maybe I can clarify it. I think what you're talking about is the idea of looking at DNA sequences and then reconstructing their former sequences based on a comparative method of looking at multiple species that are extinct today, and then building on this using the concept of common descent and evolution. We find this DNA that is found in a large number of species today that would have had a common ancestor, hypothesized to be of great antiquity. We actually, though, can extend this directly from known species that, well, I'll bring that up later. Go ahead.
Humans share lots of
sorry again.
genes across the whole living world.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a moment, John. That microphone is transferred over to here, so can you share the one with the purple cord, please?
Oh, okay. And then we can share
Sorry,
this
we have a
one.
limited mixer over here.
Okay. I'll just comment that humans share genes with a wide spectrum of organisms. We have lots of genes in common with bananas and yeast and bacteria. There's a lot of the same machinery that we have in our cells that are in bacteria. One important one is the machine that turns ADP into ATP. ATP is the energy currency that drives most cellular processes in all organisms. And the ATP synthase is a rotary motor, typically spins at 10,000 RPM, changes ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and adenosine triphosphate. And we find that little machine in bacteria, in plants, in animals, every kind of life. And so, the genes that code for those proteins that make that machine are very similar in all these species. So there's this commonality of genetic information in all sorts of life. So I'm not sure what you're getting at.
What I'm saying is, in the fossil record, when eyes begin, then everything after that has that eye gene. And then next, when they get, like you said, they get to have upright thing, and it spreads. Now all of them have that. So the gene starts, and then once it starts, then it stays that way. The lineage of that thing.
But we don't have tissue that has DNA in it except for just a few fossil organisms. We've got some DNA from Neanderthal humans, for example. But we don't have DNA.
Well, there's DNA. The Neanderthal's been completely, the whole genome's been sequenced.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying there are a few examples of fossil, of being able to extract DNA from fossils. But for the most part, we do not have DNA for most fossils. So, you need to get your story right.
It's not, yeah. It's not from the fossils. It's looking at living organisms now and seeing that they share common genes. And then knowing from the fossil record when we think they would have had a common ancestor and what kind of characteristics those have. Related to what you're talking about is something I find even more interesting, actually, which is the idea of resurrection. And this time it's resurrecting genes, and not Lazarus. And so it turns out you can reconstruct ancient gene patterns, or ancient sequences, okay, by comparison with multiple living species today. And you can see what they actually did. Because you can take that sequence, you can stick it into a yeast or into a bacteria, you can let it produce the product, the protein or the enzyme, then you can test it to see what this thing was for. Right? To me, that is a tremendous test and a very difficult test of evolutionary theory. If it didn't work, right, then you'd have a problem with evolutionary theory. It would say somehow that genetics doesn't conform with evolution. And
I'm going to move on to the next question, guys. Do you mind if we
only
only have
talk
like one
about
rebuttal?
it, but-
Maybe you can add your ideas into the next question if it relates to it. Yes.
My question is for both sides. How reliable is radiocarbon dating?
Good question.
I've got a slide. You want to see? Can I show them a slide?
How quick are you on the draw?
Can I say something while he's doing that?
Sure, go ahead.
Let's see, which one was yours?
We can-
This one, right?
It's not on. We can sit here and go into technicalities. There's a very simple test. You take a sample of, use a rock that can be dated. You split it in 3 pieces. You send it to 3 different labs. You don't tell them what it is. You say, date this thing, and see what happens. And when they come back, guess what? Unless there's a big mistake that is made, which happens occasionally, you get the same dates with about a 5% margin of error. So you don't have to go through all the technicalities. This has also been done hundreds of times, if not thousands, with radiometric dating. So when creationists say that this stuff's unreliable, that's bunk, because it's been tested, cross-checked hundreds, if not thousands of times.
Gary, can you answer the question, how many, I'll get to you, John, how many types of radiocarbon dating is there?
Well, okay, if you're doing radiocarbon dating, there's one that you use radiocarbon and use it to date. But for other isotopic methods, radiometric dating in general, we have almost 28 different isotopic sequences that we can use. Some of them are rarely ever used, and I think it's a shame, because I think that'd be really a lot of fun if I got somebody to pay for doing it. And that's one of the problems. They're really expensive, some of them. I'm thinking of like aluminum and beryllium, cosmogenic isotopes that are caused by sunlight hitting rocks. And you can date how long the rock has gotten buried. And I would love to try doing an artifact. Because think about this, here you got humans, they're banging on rocks, okay? So the core of that rock hasn't been exposed to sunlight, right? And so now it gets exposed for a while, and then it gets buried. I would so love to see if I could get data from that. I don't think anybody's going to pay for it, though.
And what's your slide about there?
Okay, so here is the slide I wanted you to see in terms of the reliability of radiocarbon dating specifically. Okay? This is a calibration. We have the carbon measurement here, calendar date here. These are not based on other radiometric methods. They're based on actual year-to-year counts of annual events. Okay? And it's an interesting thing. It turns out we go from tree rings, and we've got cores of sea bottoms. Altogether, there's some 6 different metrics that are used here to form this calibration. You'll notice that the carbon dating typically is underestimating the age. Not overestimating, underestimating the age. And as you get towards the extremes out here, what's happening is it's getting less and less reliable. Okay? So by the time you get much past, 40, 45,000 years, it's getting pretty dodgy. Okay? This is one of the ways that, well, in fact, Dr. Baumgardner's work, where he submitted samples for carbon dating. And carbon dating is good for what? Organic remains. Okay? If you give him a diamond, right, that's not an organic remain. That's sort of like saying that my speedometer doesn't work on my truck if I go over a cliff. It's not supposed to. Okay? And the other is, a diamond is a very difficult thing to break down and put through the system. And the more you got to do to it to make it go through the system, the more you're going to mess up. Okay? And finally, no machine's perfect. Okay? Even my old truck speedometer, it says I can go 120. Not even if I went over a cliff. It's just not going to be accurate. So when you get out on these extremes, you're going to find that you can put almost anything in the machine, right? And it's going to say, oh, it's like, wrong, 60,000 years old.
Can I?
Yes. You guys can interrupt yourselves, by the way.
Give him the equal amount of time.
As much as he wants up to the time, sure. John, go ahead, please.
We're perhaps going off a little off topic with talking about radioisotope dating. Is that okay?
It's okay.
Yeah, it's
part of evolution process.
So I'll just say that I was, as mentioned in the introduction, I was part of the Radioisotopes in the Age of the Earth project.
From the Institute of Creationism.
And it was headed up through the Institute for Creation Research. There were 7 of us, 7 PhDs, and they needed somebody to head up the C14 project And I said, okay, I'll do it. But let me just mention that this, the method that's used to measure C14, there was a new method came online in the early 1980s called accelerator mass spectrometer method, where it uses an accelerator which accelerates ions to close to the speed of light, several million electron volts, and then puts them through a magnetic field and turns them, and they're separated according to mass. And so they're able, this technology is able to detect one atom of C14 out of, let me get this right, 100,000 trillion other carbon atoms. 1 in 10 to the 17 atoms. It has that sensitivity to do that. The problem is that in our atmosphere today, there's only about 1 in 1 trillion atoms that's C14. So you've only got 5 orders of magnitude left to work with to use for your dating. But everybody was very excited in the early 80s that prior to that time with this, where they were actually counting C14 decays, they were limited to something like 30 to 40,000 years.
Yeah, 30.
Okay, we're ready for the next question, John.
And the problem was cosmic rays would give false counts. They were all excited with this new method. Because the method appeared to be able to extend the dating range back to 100,000 years.
Yeah, that was Rice University.
It sounds like you're agreeing, guys. Is that?
Yeah.
You're agreeing. Okay.
All right, and so everybody was all excited about testing all these things, and so but the problem was they couldn't find anything that would date much past 50,000 years. And they said, oh, there must be, we're detecting all this C14 several, way beyond the sensitivity of our instrument. What's going on? We must have some problems in our techniques. There must be some modern carbon getting into the process. So it was that frantic attempt to try to discover where this unexpected C14 was coming from led to dozens of publications in the 80s and 90s, by the laboratories themselves, people running this equipment, and they did.
Actually, there's a journal, Radiocarbon.
Yeah, and they're published in the journal, most of them, some of them in the, what is it, the Journal of Scientific Instruments, what was that?
Oh, I didn't read that.
Yeah, there's several.
I just read Radiocarbon.
Yeah, there's several papers in that journal as well. Anyway, what these papers did was document the fact that in essentially every fossil that still has carbon in it, and in things like bones and shells and coal and oil.
Or diamonds or anything
well,
else.
Diamonds.
Limestone,
Limestone.
carbonate's got carbon in it.
Yeah.
You can, the equipment is not immune to error.
No, the equipment, they determined
Robert?
the equipment was fine. The laboratory techniques were fine. That the carbon was in the sample when it got to the laboratory.
No, it wasn't.
It
turns out it wasn't.
And as it happens.
No.
John.
Let him finish.
Oh, okay,
So
go ahead.
But he should tell the truth.
I document in these papers, they determined that this was what they called in situ contamination. It's not from our equipment, it's not from the processes we use to process the samples. So basically they washed their hands of this problem of C14 in these samples, said it's the problem of the people providing the samples, and and so what we're going to do is we're going to set our standard background to either 40 or 50,000 years, and if a sample comes to our lab that has quite a bit of radiocarbon in it, Well, we're automatically gonna subtract that background. So if our background is 40,000 years, and we have a sample that dates 50,000 years, we subtract 40,000 equivalent, that means there's zero, we declare that it's of infinite age.
Can we have a rebuttal for that, please, before we move on to the next question? I'd like to, for the speakers to keep in mind, 1 minute, please. And then just so we can get moving, we have a list of questions here.
If there was an instrument that was online and supposedly had a 40,000 year error, that's going to be an instrument that goes down. Okay, this is silly. There are no errors of that magnitude.
That's right.
Radiocarbon,
That's right.
radiocarbon analysis is published in a journal called Radiocarbon, and you'll find, if you look at it, it's online, University of Arizona. It's free to anybody. Okay? And what you'll find is most of the articles are on how not to do it, how to avoid making mistakes. Now, it does turn out that no instrument is perfect. I think we could agree with that. Okay?
I say
Is any instrument
they've
perfect?
worked out the kinks.
Even a block of rock or an anvil or a hammer is not perfect. If any of you have hit your thumb, you know that the hammer is not perfect. Okay? It will still be subject to various sorts of errors.
I'm going to move on to the next question. I really want to get to some questions here. That's what the meat of this debate is.
So it's not
Okay.
reliable?
Of course it's reliable. It's reliable
And
based
guys,
on
on any of these particular
data I just
topics,
mentioned.
if you would like to talk to the speakers, you're more than welcome to stick around. We're going to be moving on to the next question. Go ahead, sir.
Regarding chromosomes,
Closer.
closer to the,
That way I don't have to turn up as much.
regarding chromosomes, which I don't believe was mentioned in this talk, I'd like to address primarily here and move out from here if possible. Is there anything that you can point to in the evidence from the fossil record that would indicate how many chromosomes each of these forms or transitional forms had, and whether that would lead to any good hypotheses with respect to transitioning each of these from one to the other? For example, humans have 46 chromosomes. I'm not aware of any others that have 46.
Well, what?
Just leave it on, please, Gary.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'll leave it on all the time. I thought it was causing the feedback. Sorry. Oh, okay. So as it turns out, humans have 46 chromosomes. So the other great apes have another one. Actually, 2 more, because they're paired. Okay? When we look at chromosome 2 in humans, we find that it is the result of a fusion of 2 of the other great ape chromosomes that have joined together, and then this central core where they've joined is actually degraded because it's non-functional. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I'm asking specifically with respect to the fossil record, since that's the discussion. Where do we see the evidence of that in the fossil record, if at all?
Chromosomes aren't preserved in fossils, but what you can do is look at living animals and make determinations by that.
The oldest fossils that we have data for, particularly the human line or lineage, are from 2 labs, one at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. It's probably the best of the 2. The other one's in Spain. They're good, but they're better at Germany. The oldest DNA fragment of any kind they found is from a Homo erectus. And it was about 700,000 years old.
Wow.
But it's just fragments.
John, were you about to speak?
No, DNA is very fragile. It's not preserved in fossils. So, it is amazing that these Neanderthal fossils have yielded essentially complete genomes for the Neanderthal. There are labs working on looking at other fossils. I have some friends that are trying to see if some of there's some conifer cones that have been frozen, it appears, up in the Arctic, looking to see if there might be some DNA in that. The only other example of ancient DNA that I know of, back in the think it was in the early 90s, they were able to revive bacteria from the salt, from the waste isolation pilot plant. That salt supposedly was Triassic, on the order of 250 million years old. And they were able to revive this bacteria, which, I mean, if that is for real, that means that DNA has survived that long, or is, at least from that part of the record, in bacteria. So that's as far as I know, that's the record for having any viable DNA surviving for a significant part of the fossil.
John, I have a question. I'm just going to butt in for a moment. Are you an old Earth creationist or a young Earth creationist? And I know there's several different versions between the two.
Well, I'm a young Earth creationist. I don't have any problem in using these radioisotope ages because so I mean they're so widely used. I mean, in order to communicate, you need to mention, as I just did, those ages. But my own position is that the fossil record is a product of the Genesis flood that occurred only a few thousand years ago. And all these fossils were laid down in this single year-long cataclysm that buried all these animals.
May I ask how the koalas and the kangaroos, which are limited to the continent of Australia, managed to hip-hop their way across the sea to get to Noah's Ark?
They didn't have to come from there. The Earth's surface before the flood, the world was so devastated. I can't identify a single part of the surface of the Earth today that was around before the flood. The flood either eroded the continents in some places by kilometers or deposited kilometers of sediment on top of them.
So all those living things that made it to the Ark had to be really in close proximity, so somehow they all got congregated somewhere in the Near East?
If you look at the biblical account, there's indication that God brought them to the Ark. God caused them to come to migrate to the Ark.
That's not science.
Well, no, if it's history, if it's reality.
Actually, the history of the account of Genesis, the flood, is based on ancient Sumerian and Babylonian accounts. I have the ancient Babylonian account on my computer. There are far too many parallels in that ancient account to the story of Genesis to be based on coincidence.
We're going to move on
No, it's
to
not.
another question.
Let me just affirm that it's not coincidence. There's the memory. The memory of the flood is one of the most pervasive things in the human consciousness. 200 accounts of the flood in all cultures all over the world. And if this was a real event, it's not surprising that it's recorded in all these
Those accounts are all different. Many of them are based on rivers and other things. It's not the same.
It is the case that people need to live near water, and it is the case if you live near water, you're going to have a flood. So as folks get out and they start encountering folks from other cultures, they hear about these flood stories. Okay? There's floods that have happened here that, at the time, people thought it was the end of the world. They thought their world was going to be destroyed right here in Orange County. And so as it turns out, you say that there's hundreds and hundreds of flood stories. Well, there's hundreds and hundreds of languages, and they are all spoken by people that live on or near water courses, and they all are going to have floods.
I really would like to go to the next question. Is that okay, guys?
Okay. Let me just make one comment about all the tablets that were discovered in the Assyrian library of King Ashurbanipal, discovered in the 1800s. And it was a major find. That library was a huge find, thousands upon thousands of clay tablets. Mm-hmm. And one of the most pervasive events described in those tablets was the Great Flood. It was something that was referred to as just a major event in our history. And they talked about what
it turns out that library, John, was the result of a scribal school. And the way you learn to write cuneiform is by copying it.
Okay.
And there were tens of
I
thousands
really
of
would like to
copies
go to the
of
next
the
question,
same
guys.
tablet.
Next question, please,
There's
John.
even spelling errors that are just
Okay,
a little.
this guy's waited long enough.
We're flooded with questions.
I don't know if we'll be able to get to the rest of you going this speed.
Okay.
The question to
To the microphone, please.
the creationists. A question to creationists. I want only yes or no answer, okay? Do you believe the horse and donkey, they have common ancestor? The wolf and fox and dog, they have common ancestor? The tiger, jaguar, and leopard, they have common ancestor, yes or no?
I tend to suspect, I didn't get the first down.
Perhaps the horse and donkey, do they have common ancestor, or yes or no?
I'm thinking, I suspect the answer is yes.
Okay,
That they're a
another
single-
thing.
Okay.
Another thing, you believe at time t equals 0, there was no human being, and time t plus delta t, there was human being? Yes or no?
Okay.
Yes or no?
Yes. I will say the only way you can get organisms as complex as what we see around us.
Yeah.
The only rational, logical, scientific answer to that is near instantaneously and supernaturally. There is no other rational possibility.
So when delta t there was,
So
minus delta t no human, plus delta t there was human being, okay? That's what you believe in, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No. Next question, please. Oh, go. We're cruising now. Yes or no? No, just kidding.
Yes, in the slide that Bob shared with Lucy and what he described as the transition from the chimpanzee to Lucy to the humans, can you please share your perspective on how the pelvis region got to be different from the chimpanzee? And then when you're done with that, and then I'll walk off, when you're done with that, then perhaps the evolution side can share that why, when you said there's 76 conglomerates that are taught in our public schools and 0 for creation, if you could share how the creation perspective can be taught when our government has banned it based on church and state. So there isn't equal time. So if you could.
That's a loaded question if I ever heard one.
You're mixing apples and oranges.
It's not,
I'm talking about science.
yeah, I wanted them to address the Lucy pelvis thing, and then if you could address how creation can possibly be taught when our government won't let them.
Hey, John, before you continue, please try to make it under a minute. Okay? I know it's hard, but we'd like to try to go through this.
All right. I would say that all these types, like Lucy, she's generally in the category of an Australopithecine. I don't think there's much debate about that. And there is a big gap between Australopithecines and humans. So in my view, they were a separate hominid, a separate, let's call it primate, separate primate, a separate organism, and that humans have not evolved. And genetically, I would say it's essentially impossible. There's so much, if you just take a chimpanzee, there's something like a 30% difference in the genome of a chimpanzee and a human, regardless of all the propaganda. The length of the length of the genome is 9% different. And recently the chimpanzee Y chromosome was sequenced, and it is radically different from a human Y chromosome. And so, somebody mentioned Haldane, I think it was before we got started. Okay.
One minute.
Sorry.
Make it quick, guys, please.
You know, one only has so much time in the debate. I wanted to mention that humans did not evolve from the chimpanzee. That's a common myth. The reason we use the chimpanzee is it's our closest living relative, and the most ancient ancestor of humans would probably looked similar to a chimpanzee. But to just blow off Australopithecus is just an ape is ridiculous because this thing walked fully upright. It had the bones to do it, and we have fossil footprints of Australopithecines showing that they walked upright. So we have here a skull of an ape on a body that's more human than ape. If that isn't a transitional fossil, I don't know what is. Also, saying there's nothing between Australopithecus and modern humans is nonsense. I showed some examples, and I only showed some. There are many more. I mean, sorry, I only had 20 minutes. I didn't have time to give a dissertation on the evolution of humans, which would take a complete course in anthropology.
Dave, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, Australopithecus, you forget about Dr. Lovejoy who crushed that pelvis and rebuilt it so that it would look human.
There's over 300.
We have many more specimens.
Don't worry about it.
You've got a 450 cc brain,
We've
you've got a
got-
1600 cc brain, you've got, you know, it's a long arm, short legged knuckle walker. It wasn't anything
No,
close to being human.
it could not have walked in that form. It
I saw Lucy too. I went to Washington just to visit her.
That's just not true.
Well, I don't care what you guys want.
Okay.
Because, no, here's where I'm gonna respond as an anthropologist. I've taught human evolution for close to 20 years. Okay? When we study how bones are shaped and how they articulate to one another, right, there are very unique and distinct patterns that only exist in a bipedal animal. Okay? A knuckle walker does not have the same knees, it doesn't have the same ankles, it doesn't have the same wrist bones, it doesn't have the same knuckles. Okay? They have to be specialized to be a knuckle walker. Okay? Lucy could not, or any Australopithecine could not have been a knuckle walker. That is just simply untrue.
Okay, next question, please.
Okay, I'm glad you were again.
I'll get close to the microphone. Oh, that's, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not the best sound man over here. Okay, sir, close to the microphone, please.
Okay, you said that you were a young Earth creationist. And I can understand that because in Genesis 1 it talks about morning and evening. So my question is, why aren't different species mixed within the different layers of the fossil record? Because if it's all created in 6 days, and there was a worldwide flood, you know, you think a flood would mix everything up and there'd be different species at different levels. Why are they specific to certain levels?
That's a difficult question, but the basic answer that is given is that the flood didn't destroy everything at once. There was a progressive destruction of the land areas. With the shallow marine areas being destroyed first, bearing those kinds of animals, as the flood rose, it destroyed, it reached further inland in the continent, destroyed higher and higher ecological levels of what was distributed on the continents. So that, and it wasn't until midway that it was destroying the dinosaurs. And so that's not a complete answer, but it gives you a little idea of what what we suspect happened.
Where were the dinosaurs living, John? I mean, where were they living? In terms of halfway, where were they?
Okay, I would say they were generally
In the mountains?
No, not in the mountains. The mammals were in the
The
mountains.
mammals are in the mountains, the dinosaurs are down the flats,
They were generally in the flat and lowland areas.
and only in what continents? I
Well,
mean, don't we find dinosaur fossils in every continent?
yes, we do.
We do, don't we?
So there was a supercontinent prior to the flood.
Okay, so we find them everywhere, and we find them at various elevations, and we do
Microphone.
find mammals today at various elevations, don't we? I mean, they're
But-
high
but
elevation, low elevation.
Now, the topography has changed radically
Okay,
since the flood.
so then your assertion that they were somewhere low and the other guys were high just fell apart. You just had to deny it in order to maintain your argument.
No, I'm saying that
Where were they?
where the fossils occur today has been affected by the uplifts, the
But
tectonic
where did they
changes that have affected the world since the flood.
Where did they live?
Can we stay on the questions?
All right, my guess is that the dinosaurs generally lived in lowland areas, tropical kinds of areas. But they were, well, I'll just leave it at that.
A real quick response. Creationists love to talk about how the Grand Canyon was carved, but in terms of evolution, it's not that so much, because all of those layer-cake layers in the Grand Canyon. What we have, which goes totally against this whole idea of a single flood event. First of all, in some layers you'll have a fossil desert, in another layer you'll have a fossil forest, and the plants and animals that live there. But we also have layer upon layer of preserved mud cracks, okay? Representing hundreds of individual seasons of wet and dry. And there are layer upon layer of these mud cracks. It's not just one. Second, you have these layers of algal mats called stromatolites, layer upon layer of those formed by daily fluctuations in sediment and algae growth. Some record centuries of growth. We have layer upon layer of sediments with complex burrows and trackways. Each layer represents sea bottom that creatures crawled upon, burrowed into, and then became buried again. Layer upon layer upon layer. And this is delicate stuff. And there's so much more that just totally undermines this idea of a single flood.
That slide I showed of the Precambrian Cambrian boundary, the great unconformity in the Grand Canyon with those large rocks. Just feet away from where that picture is shot, there are worm burrows in the base of that Tapete sandstone. So and to me, I was shocked. How could worms survive that kind of intense cataclysm that produced those large boulders? But they were there. So there's a lot going on, so I believe there were critters living critters that were scurrying around as this cataclysm unfolded.
Layer upon layer of them. Layer upon layer, not just one. Layer upon layer, representing different seasons, different events.
I'm going to move to the next question, guys. Thank you. And actually, I have a question, and I have to paraphrase it from my phone, wherever it went. How many people here saw the Bill Nye and Hammond debate? Okay, I'm going to repeat something from the text, and it's to the creationists. If there's only 4,000 or 7,000 pairs of animals on the ark, which one was it?
I think the number that was quoted was 7,000.
7,000. So if 7,000 species came off the ark, and there's 1.3 million species now, actually there's probably more than that. That's not even discovered. Some scientists say double that. That you'd have to have about 9 species a day.
Well, the problem.
So that means you'd see a wolf in one day, and you'd walk out the next day and see a chihuahua.
Yeah, the problem is that most of the species on Earth are insects, and there's
So a new species of insect a day, then.
Well, I don't believe there were insects on the ark, and I mean there's some. I'm sure there were some that happened to get on there, but Noah was instructed to save the air-breathing, land-dwelling animals.
But how did the species duplicate so quickly? Most of the time it takes tens or even hundreds of thousands of years for species to develop their own.
Well, I would say these animals that got off the ark got off into an empty world, lots of ecological niches to fill. And when these animals were created originally by God, they had a lot of built-in genetic diversity. Most of the human alleles that we have that determine whether we have blue eyes or brown eyes, that's not a result of mutation. That's a result of created diversity. Blue eyes possibly could be a result of a mutation, but most of the things that determine the differences in the way we look are not a result of mutation. They're a result of created alleles that were passed down. The same was true of the animals that were on the ark. They brought along a lot of genetic potential, a lot of internal genetic diversity. And so when they went into all these ecological niches that were unfilled, and especially in small groups, small populations, carrying only a little bit of that diversity, it was easy for some speciation to take place after the flood.
Then where did the?
More evolution than anything I talked about.
Yeah, a lot of speciation, that's
Where
right.
did the,
I'm
where
going
did
to-
all of that diversity go?
It's-
Why don't we see that in the DNA
Well,
today?
you see,
Was it splitting off,
all
was
the-
it being eliminated?
all the
What happened
varieties,
to it?
all the varieties of dog that we have are a result of splitting up the gene pool, concentrating.
No, we can find the same genes and the same chromosomes in all of them. We find differences only in the expression. of
That's
those
not
genes.
right, that's not true.
Those are not different species.
These are different alleles
No, so
that are
if they're the same
concentrated.
species.
And, you know, I'm gonna have to cut it off. I don't know what allele means, but I'm gonna have to ask him later.
It's a version of a gene, it's just a
Okay.
different version of a
Okay.
gene.
So we have closing statements, I think. Don, you're gonna have to remind me of the time. Now you're gonna have to go online because you can't talk anyway. Don, this is the last question. I'm sorry. It's 9:26 and we still have closing statements. We try to get out of here before 9:30. I know there's a lot of questions for everybody. Again, please introduce yourself to the speakers beforehand or afterwards, please. And Don, you have, before we go to the last question, do you have a timing for both of them?
2.5 seconds.
All right, the naturalistic evolutionists have 3 minutes and 5 seconds left. The younger creationists have 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
You guys want to yield your closing statements, or do you want to go for 4 minutes?
Just give them each 10.
10 minutes? I'll go 7.
We'll
Anybody say 5?
Five.
6? Okay, 5 minutes. Sir, you have the last question, go ahead.
You wanna go first? We got a question left though.
One last question before the closing debate.
Yeah, basically in Genesis, it talks about God creating male and female, and that they reproduce after their own kind, which is what we see, what we observe. Wouldn't it indicate, though, if evolution was true, that you would have to have a male and female of the species evolving at the same time?
No.
How do you explain that?
Well, I've only got a minute. It turns out, okay, the idea that sex is a really easy thing to determine is a wrong idea. It turns out most mollusks, for example, are functioning hermaphrodites. Okay? They can either be fertilized as male or female. Sometimes they'll both, and they'll fertilize each other. Okay? And they'll both bear eggs. Okay? I like to fish a lot. There's a sheephead. It's a type of wrasse. All wrasse have a common feature that's very interesting. They start out as females. They start out as females and then they become male. The sheephead, the California sheephead, can go back the other way. And it all depends on the environment. If they've got to contest with another big male that's bigger than they are, they either split or they go female again. There's a very interesting thesis I hope work a little bit on by a woman up at Cal State Long Beach in marine biology. And she was studying how these wrasse can be female, and then they're males, and then occasionally, under the right circumstances, female again. Okay? So this notion that it's some exclusive and isolated from the get-go, male and female after their kind, and it just ain't right. Okay? Unless somebody's playing games. Now, hominids were male and female. Okay? I would say that we could go back to the egg-laying mammals, and we would still find that they're male and female. Okay? But by the time we get to some very interesting lizards, okay, who in fact can be all female and reproduce. Okay? They do a mating dance with each other, right, and then fertilize their own eggs. Okay? They're all female.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it's a little
Don,
tricky.
Don, 7 minutes? You got the timer?
7 minutes for each?
That's correct. For each group, they could do 3 and 4, or 7 and 6 and 1.
Get a response to that question?
I could answer his question from the evolutionary.
Microphone, please, John, so we can get on tape.
I could answer the question as an evolutionist if that would be interesting. Because he didn't ask how sex evolved. That wasn't his question. He's saying in order to get a new species, wouldn't you have to have the same mutations in the male and the female?
Oh, I misunderstood his question. I think he's talking about evolution of sex. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the evolutionary answer is that it's populations that evolve. You have an isolated population that, has only maybe a small part of the original gene pool, starts doing its own thing, and somehow there's maybe some mutations come along, which I don't believe, can do it, but, and so you don't have just one individual that's the new species. You have those new genes shared by a small population that includes both males and females. So that's the evolutionary story.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, we'll have our closing statements, and since the Christians went first, I'm going to have them go first now, so we'll have the conclusion with the evolutionists. You can use your microphone, or you can use the podium, either one.
Okay. Well, as I shared in my slides, I believe the fossil record is a record of a global cataclysm, the Genesis flood. A cataclysm beyond what the human mind can imagine, that totally resurfaced the earth. The ocean floor, pre-flood ocean floor, was all recycled by subduction into the Earth's interior. The continents in many places were eroded by many kilometers. On the average of almost 2 kilometers of sediment was deposited on the continents containing the fossils. So this was just an incredible cataclysm. And somehow there was an orderly laying down of the sediment record, in an orderly, relatively orderly sequence of fossils. But the characteristics of these layers we do not have anything like this going on with the formations thousands of miles in both directions, uniform on the continents today. We simply do not have this pattern of sedimentation going on. On the continents today, there's localized erosion for the most part, localized deposition. And so the geological record, fossil-bearing geological record is radically different from what is going on the Earth today. And we're convinced it's a product of a single large global cataclysm. And that the fossil record is a record of animals that were living before the flood. All the ones in the fossil record were living before the flood and were buried in this single year-long catastrophe. And then the earth was repopulated after the flood. And these animals migrated, and the distribution that we see today reflects the way the animals migrated away from the Middle East. And so I know that's hard for most of us to imagine, given the kind of education that we've all had. As far as the age is concerned, if y'all are interested in the work of the RATE team, we had multiple independent lines of radioisotope evidence that pointed to the fact that the Earth is thousands, not billions of years old. That's radioisotope evidence for that. And so you can read the papers, they're online. The 800-page technical report we produced is online, free of charge. The individual chapters are PDF files from the website ICR, www.icr.org/rate2. So all of that information is available. Much of what I've had to say today on the Cambrian explosion is in this book, Darwin's Doubt. It, by the way, is produced by a group that's they're not young Earth creationists, but what they've got in this book is, I consider, pretty good. So if y'all are interested in looking into more about the Cambrian explosion, I recommend this book.
Actually, Steve is.
Okay, you are going to yield your last 2 minutes. Don? You're not using the lights, are you, Don?
Yeah, you're giving your minutes to me? Yeah,
He yielded, I think we've used our minutes.
No, 3 minutes and 37 seconds left.
3 minutes left. Go ahead.
Well, there's so many things that you guys brought up that I would love to talk about. Starting off with Behrman's, understanding what a Behrman is actually, it's a created kind, which includes species, families, genuses. So we have variations within each kind that can actually multiply quite rapidly. We don't need that many animals. One wolf kind would be plenty for the dogs, one cat kind. So we have, that's one we've already talked about. What I would have liked to have gone through is whale evolution. I have a whole slide presentation on whale evolution and how it's basically based on fraud. So
Fraud?
Yes.
Fraud, wow.
But I
And
don't
your
have time.
expertise is based on what?
He's talking, let him talk.
Say, Gary, can you let him talk? You keep it interrupting.
Well, it came out of Berkeley.
Yeah, he was addressing me directly.
No, I wasn't addressing you. I was saying the study itself.
He didn't interrupt you.
What slide
Closing
are you
statement.
looking for? Where in the presentation is it?
Well-
Near the end? Because I'm connected to the projector, so.
Oh,
Yeah,
the projector
yeah.
automatically turns off after so many minutes. Can you
Oh.
turn that projector on again? Plus, are you using your correct computer there, John, or Dave? It's the other computer that's hooked up, right?
No, this one isn't hooked up. I just wanted to find it on this one
I
first
see.
before I
That's okay.
jumped over to the other one. Okay, on
It takes a while
slide
to warm
78.
Slide 78, okay.
Does this thing work?
Yeah, but I'm at two, let me just.
Gotta get the projector. We're on slide 200 and something, so.
I'm almost to 78
Chris, do you understand that projector?
He's waiting to bring up the slide. Yeah, just leave it go and it'll hook up. I have it here so the people at home will be able to see it as well.
And while we're waiting for that,
There we go.
okay. Now,
When we go back, is it?
no, this is Praxedis, oldest of most. This is kind of the evolution of this discovery as you find on the Berkeley website. Praxedis is the oldest and most primitive whale yet discovered. It's an important transitional form linking the Paleocene carnivorous land mammals and later more advanced marine whales. This doesn't seem to be working. Well, what they found was one more. This is what they based on it, and you had this in your slides, so I'm not adding anything. But yet discovered, and of course, in time and its morphology, Praxedis is perfectly intermediate, a missing link between earlier land mammals and later full-fledged whales. That was 1994. 7 years later, 2001, you have the picture. Okay, now Praxedis is a tapir, pretty much. And it's not an amphibian, it's just, keep going. Terrestrial mammal, no more amphibious than a tapir. Okay, then go on to, Gingrich misinterpreted the basis based on inadequate fossil evidence. Well, he had just, now here we have in Berkeley 2004 whale evolution. You got Praxedis, then you got some kind of a transitional form, and you end up with the beluga whale. Now go.
Dave, I think you're going to have to wrap it up with a general summation of what you're saying there. The
Well,
time is.
actually, the nose is located once down here, then it's in the middle, then it's up here. So one fellow recommended that if you just go home tonight and you just drill 2 holes here, maybe you'll be able to breathe better. But it's just not, there's no evolution here. This is what you got. They're not related. Okay, keep going. So I would say this is just simply deception. And that's what you find in most cases. Most of what you said is just simply not true. That's what I'm saying. And I would like to go through in peace. Well, I'm sure that it isn't. But anyway, this whole idea of Australopithecus being the line of human evolution, that's ridiculous. And any of these so-called human fossils, we have not found a single one that is related, that is human. I I mean, that is even, you know, we base it on parts, like Ramapithecus, for example. We have it based on a handful of teeth, piece of the jaw. When we could have walked on all fours or on his belly for all we know with a handful of teeth. Later on we found Ramapithecus, the baboons in Ethiopia with teeth just like Ramapithecus. Every single one of these so-called pre-human fossils has been proven to be a fraud. So anyway, that's just something that you need to, we wish we had time to go through in detail, but I guess I don't have any time.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, guys, you're up.
Am I on?
This is the last part.
Let's
Last
talk about
part.
arrogant ignorance. The great majority of prominent creationists, Gish, Ham, Owen, Johnson, Morris, Sarfati, Strobel, and there are many others, do not have advanced degrees in the sciences most relevant to evolution, geology and biology. In biology, particularly paleontology, anthropology, zoology, genetics, and molecular biology. Yet despite their lack of proper academic training and credentials, they have no problem attacking the work of scientists who are recognized by their peers for their expertise. What chutzpah. For those creationists that do have advanced degrees, such as Baumgardner, B.E., Kenyon, Meyer, Wise, in each case, their religious beliefs take precedence over the science, and most admit that. Creationism is not motivated by a genuine interest in the advancement of science, but by belief in the inerrancy of Scripture.
Okay, we have what, 2 minutes left?
Mike.
We have what, 2 minutes?
5 minutes, right? Well, if I let you go the full 9 minutes, you've got quite a bit.
Oh, I thought it was 7 that we agreed upon.
Well,
7 is what we agreed on, 9 is
What they did?
What they did. Well, you can
Take
take
advantage
a
of it.
minute off of me, because I interrupted a little bit. What if I say this in here? Yeah, I can't reach it from there. And let's, we're back on G. And let's go to, that's J. G. John and I were talking earlier before we started this about the old days where we'd actually have to toggle switches by hand, use paper tape.
Your debate room? Is that what you?
Yeah, it's at Creationist Debate 2014. Let's look at, let's go back to tectonic, no, let's go back to radiocarbon. Because I want to address the, I need the, it's right by you, Bruce. Thank you. Oh. Okay. All right. Oh, I see. Oh, it has to register. Okay. All right, here we go. When we looked at 50,000 cycles of laminate deposits in a lake bottom, we don't see any disturbances that could be possibly associated with the rebuilding of the entire world. When we look at 110,000 annual cycles in the Greenland ice cores, we don't see anything. I mean, if we had a global flood, first of all, I think we would probably float most of the ice. It does float. So we wouldn't have any ice on Greenland. We wouldn't have ice in the Antarctic. We wouldn't have had glaciers anywhere in the world. Okay?
That's right. Let me affirm, yes, the ice age,
Floats,
ice
right?
is post-flood.
Okay, it's all post-flood. All many, many, many miles with many, many thousands of layers that are annual. And so we go back to this one thing that I want you to look at and try and figure out how that could be explained. Okay? Not with any miracles, just facts. Like with the old
TV show, the police, just the facts, man, just the facts.
I explained it in my chapter in the rate
Well,
book.
I read your chapter.
John, no rebuttals, please, John.
And,
This is
well,
a
no,
closing
yeah, I
ceremony.
interrupted him. I
Closing
think that's
statements
it.
does
Right.
not require a rebuttal. Thank you very much.
I read your stuff, John, several times. In fact, I put this in here just for you. Okay? And it turns out that by going at annual events, independent of any dating method, just counting the rings, counting the layers. Okay? We use those to correct for any kind of errors that are inherent in the instrumentation, inherent in any other kind of basically screw up, and lab work or field work. And sometimes you get stuff that's just ridiculous. I had a guy working for me that I got a carbon-14 date from a sample he took, and it was 1,500 years younger than the other 4 right next to it that other people took. I found out when he got drunk one night, he put his cigarette out in that sample because he was mad at me. Huh? Things happen, right? And when things happen that are so totally ridiculous, like 4 dates, or actually it was 4 dates that were all tight within 80 years of each other, and then I got this one goofball that's 1,500 years off from all the others, right? Here's what you do. You put it in the report, and then in a footnote you say, I didn't use that when I averaged the dates. Okay? It's still in the report. Okay? Now I would like to go back and repeat their publication and say, and this dingbat put his cigarette out in my sample. Okay? Sometimes we have accidents. One of the accidents I had was I dropped the sample. I would have loved to have just picked it up, but I couldn't. I dropped it. Okay? I'm not sure that all lab guys are going to say, I dropped it, boss. Okay? You know, especially if it's payday. Okay? Things happen, right? Nothing's perfect. Okay? It doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden a fraud or a lie or impossible or inaccurate to the point of being useless. That's all.
So but I could comment on this picture.
We will have to go to dinner now. How many people are going to be joining us at TGIFs? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe. Just for a beer.